So I'll start off by thanking everyone for coming back. And I thought that I'd put the old adage, you can never be overdressed, to the test. So this is this. Today's been a great day for me. It started off with the Baroness, who actually used the word ubiquitous twice, which I thought was pretty cool. Then we had a doctor, and then we had a bit of a boy genius hacker, and then this terrific panel, and then Matthew, who after he was finished, I was exhausted, so I went down and threw water on my face, so I'm good. What I'm going to do, I am not, there are police chiefs, I'm sure, here in England, and there are police chiefs in the United States that are very formal, and that is not me. I am not a super formal person. I'm the person that Matthew talked about, that if you have marginal intelligence and you're a little bit smart, that if you just stay at it and make marginal gains, the competition will either quit or die and you'll be chief of police. So here I am. Anyway, I'm going to start at the beginning. I became a police officer in June of 1981. And over the next 3.5, almost decades, to say that we've experienced change in law enforcement would be unbelievable. And because of that, now because of the role of technology and what the public expects of us is now almost just unreasonable. Many agencies, including San Francisco, when I became a police officer, had very strict height and weight requirements that prevented certain ethnicities and certainly a lot of women from being cops. In San Francisco, we had a strict age requirement. You couldn't be 35 years old. All of those things have gone away now. We only require a high school diploma to be a police officer in San Francisco and in many agencies in the United States. And back then, that was pretty much what everybody had. Now, our current academy class is over 60% college graduates, and it seems that they get smarter and smarter by the time. Brand new, our salary was fair. When we started, or I started as a police officer, we made $11.11 an hour. So I guess here that would be about £8 an hour. Police officers do quite a bit better than that. Our pension was okay, but again, it wasn't enough to compete with the private sector. Community policing, which is what is the philosophy of the entire United States. As Sir Robert Peel said, the police are the community and the community the police. Community policing, that phrase had not been coined. And to be honest with you, a lot of the older beat officers that knew everyone where they worked were upset when the term was coined because they insisted that they had been doing community policing forever and way better than anybody thought that it could ever be taught. During the 70s and 80s, the typewriter, the teletype machine, handwritten reports and notes, and switchboards and endless wires. The fact that, think about this, that walkie-talkies, who were introduced in the 60s, were not mainstream law enforcement until the year when Daniel Cuthbertson, our hacker, was born. So now, if you told police officers that they couldn't have their walkie-talkie, they'd lose their mind. But back then, when they were given the walkie-talkie, much like police officers now, when we gave them smartphones, they felt they were going to be tracked. The police are going to be tracked, which is in San Francisco. How many people have been in San Francisco before? So if you go to San Francisco, you'll notice on many street corners either red or blue, what we call call boxes. They're brass call boxes, and they're painted blue for the police, because before we had walkie-talkies, the police would traverse their beats and then go to the blue box and call in to tell the boss that you were okay. As we made those all after the 1989 earthquake workable again, just in the case of another earthquake, somehow whiskey bottles had found their way into some of those boxes. They were all empty at the time. We don't really know who was using those, but we know that the cops were the only ones with keys to those boxes. So as we kept going along, and the technology stayed, as Matthew was saying, just marginal gains, the training also didn't catch up. So in 1972, the state of California firearms training, of which all police in the United States have guns, consisted of 160 hours, and it wasn't until 1978 till it went to 400 hours, or basically gone up tenfold. Now, the San Francisco Police Academy is the longest training in the state of California. It's 7 months before you get outside, and we get everything that you could possibly imagine, although I did ask for Daniel's PowerPoint because we don't really train to cyber. Then the economy started fluctuating. Don't worry, I'll get to technology. I'm trying to tell you how we got to where we are. During the 80s and the 90s, the economy was strong, but then inflation kicked in, and we were still having a hard time getting people with higher education. But then that changed, and almost overnight, wages started to get better. San Francisco went from 93rd in the state to now in the top 3 in the country in wages. We actually came under a federal consent decree that mandated the hiring of women and minorities, which came in a flood. We have since had a minority chief of police that was a woman. So, I mean, we've literally been to the mountain. Hollywood promoted this diversity in film. Some of you may have seen the Dirty Harry series, Streets of San Francisco, Miami Vice, Hill Street Blues, Beverly Hills Cop, 48 Hours, just to name a few. But technological advances were just trickling in. Our first computers were introduced. We were capable of tracking data, and information databases were as old in San Francisco, and it's still functioning. First came in about 55 years ago, and our formal cable database, which populates still most of our systems, is 40 years old. Then in the mid-'80s, it really started to heat up. I'd been a cop for about 5 years, and I was working in narcotics, and all of a sudden, for those of you that remember, there's still some young people that won't, all of a sudden we got pagers. No? Nobody remembers? Come on. Right? So we got pagers. People could even figure out how to talk on pagers. And in narcotics, there were 3 brick cell phones for all of us. And if you could get one, it was gold, solid gold. I mean, because you called home the whole day and people could call you. So by the mid-90s, it was expected that the applicants were going to have to be getting smarter. We were getting more technology. And we were starting to work more interagency, across county lines, across state lines, and even internationally. And although the progress was steady, then we did have some bumps in the roads caused by technology. We had the O.J. Simpson trial, where there was all sorts of mishandling of evidence. There's now a TV series that's chronicling that. Actually, did everybody see that a police officer decided to turn what ended up it ended up, they don't believe it is, but they were tearing down the site of the murder, and a construction worker turned a knife over to a police officer, and he kept it. And he thought that since O.J. got acquitted, the case was closed. Homicides, by the way, are never closed. So he decided it'd be cool as a keepsake, so he wanted to get it engraved, but he didn't know the case number, the date of the homicide, or the exact location, so he called the LAPD and asked him if he could get that information so he could get the inscription right, and he was on CNN the next day as a Darwin Award winner. We also San Francisco loves to give it to LA any time we can. So, and Chief Beck and I are good friends. Then the Rodney King beating happened, captured on video. Of course, we're in the middle of our own situation right now with a series of videos across the United States that have particular scrutiny on police officers, making it really hard for the younger cops in the field just to be seen as a lot of us have been seen over the years. And body-worn cameras, I hope, are going to go miles towards addressing a lot of that to rebuild the legitimacy and public confidence that I think police officers around the world rightfully have earned and deserve. Sadly are betrayed by some officers that are definitely not the way we would have them be. That said, when people get critical of us, cops, instead of shutting it down, we usually rise to the occasion, rise above it, and we'll come out better on the other side. Anyway, the economy stayed steady, and we were getting very good at solving crime with the technology that we had. We had cell phones, we had access to the World Wide Web, which we now call the internet. Emails became standard, and communication was instantaneous all over the world. And then 9/11 hit. And then everything changed in an instant. We were at war, federal funding became almost limitless, and the instant demand on everybody was that we were to get interoperable, interagency, intercontinental, everything in an instant. Because as the 9/11 report came out, as happens to us often in law enforcement, is they found out what we should have known and expected that something should have happened. When those of us in law enforcement in the United States have said, can you imagine if you were the dispatcher that received a phone call the day before 9/11 and said, you need to make sure no one goes to work. The 3,000 people don't go to work that day because they're going to fly planes into the Twin Towers. So I would suggest that even if we took that information and had it and were serious, to expect to have gotten the private sector to have understood what we knew is something that we will never know if they would have ever paid attention. Anyway, with that in mind, just as we were making inroads into that over the next 5 or 6 years, the Great Recession hit the whole world, including the United States, and all this technology and interoperability and everything that was starting to go well, all of a sudden became a luxury that we could do without. All the young talent that we had hired, we are union police officers in the United States, so as you know, with unions, the junior officers were the first to be laid off. They started to recommend pension reform, so the most senior officers left before it could touch their pensions. And like a lot of agencies in San Francisco, as the hiring stopped and the pensioners left, it left us down about 300 officers, or 15% of our department, and I have never had those officers back in my 5 years as chief. So we had to get lean, we had to get efficient, we had to refocus our priorities, and that was to be on violent crime, making ourselves more efficient through technology, and that was basically what we tried to do. I'll talk a little bit later what that's done for us in the way of property crime, which is going this way, but we have to have our priorities. Anyway, when I became chief, we were on a client server. Our record management system was a client server, and we had strict limitations. It was about our third attempt at a record management system, and it was slow. Luckily, one of my best buddies from high school was one of those Californians that hit gold in the computer tech gold rush. He was one of the founders of Netscape. For people that remember Netscape, it was a browser that was one of the first IPOs that just went crazy. And Mike Homer was very wealthy overnight. But he was a bar owner's son, regular guy, got us in most of the trouble we ever got into in high school because he was very smart, but he was short. And so he started it, we finished it, we usually got in trouble, he ran away. So he ended up being very successful, and he made me just smart enough to be dangerous, but not smart enough to know everything that I've been learning like today and from all the people that are very smart at these things. And he said, hey, if you ever have the chance to have the input with the chief to tell somebody that you guys ought to get onto a web-based platform versus a client server, which at the time I didn't even know what the difference was, you can do it for about 20 cents on the dollar. You'll never be behind. You won't be married to somebody else fixing your system. You could be in charge of it yourself. So in 2003, I had the chief meet with Mike. She tried to hire him. He was worth about 600 million US at the time. He was not looking for work. And so she decided since she couldn't have him, it wasn't worth doing. That was frustrating because I wasn't sure what it meant, but I knew it was smart because Mike wanted to do it. So when I became chief, I asked the mayor, hey, I want to go to a web-based browser. We were already $4 million into our third client server. Our mayor is an innovation mayor. He took a chance. He said, how long? I said, I knew she told, our IT person told me 3 to 4 months. I told him, give me 6. He said, okay, done. It happened, and we started solving crimes right off the bat with this crime data warehouse. One of the cases that was just unbelievable, about a 50-year-old man was out one night in a bar with a couple. Next thing you know, they're going to go listen to music by mutual agreement at the couple's house. He date rapes both of them. They wake up in the morning. He's gone. All they know is that they had a phone number. That would have been a dead end just a year earlier. We put the phone number into our data warehouse. It searched some 30 years worth of police reports that were now uploaded. This same suspect had been a victim in a petty theft on one of our trams or buses. It came back with a name, young cops, looked him up on Facebook, came up with a picture, put it into a photo lineup, showed it to the suspects. Both victims ID'd the suspect, found him, no criminal record, swabbed him, positive DNA hit, booked him for rape and attempted murder. Never make that case in a month of Sundays prior to having the crime data warehouse. So now that we were off and running with this record management system, the next question was, how do we make better use of it? Because the fact was that we have mandatory reporting to the FBI, and we still had multiple mainframe computers that we were trying to address, and we wanted to get into predictive policing. Predictive policing that I've been talking to Ian, and I was so proud yesterday when I told him about our crime data warehouse and that we could do our own predictive policing, and he said, we thought so too, and no, you can't. Thanks for that. So, but I will follow up with what you've got that works, because, you know, not the sharpest tool in the shed, but I get it. So, but anyway, what our crime data warehouse did, though, because we were down police officers, was how do we make better use of it? Because the cops were, even as good as it was, the officers were going back to the station on a simple report that was in real time. So the thought was, well, hey, maybe we could get laptops for all the officers to keep them in the field, because at the time phones and data plans were too expensive. So Todd Bradley, who was somebody that I also met through my friend who's a big shot at Hewlett-Packard, offered to give us 50 Ultrabooks, which were beautiful. We put them to the officers. They were just too fragile. They were too bulky. But an iPad didn't have enough memory once you loaded stuff on. So I was quickly getting an education in, you can want all kinds of things, but you can only go as fast as things can catch up and as fast as your budget will allow. Then one day, my wife over here and I were walking through Target, and I see the Samsung Galaxy Note. And I had never seen a bigger cell phone in my life, and it said it was only, whatever it was, $99 at Target in the United States. So I called the IT director, and I said, hey, they got this phone. You said that there's no such phone that does, and I was literally looking at the card, because I don't know what it does. So I just read her the card, and she said, I've never heard of such a phone. I said, I'm looking at it right here. Can we call him on Monday? She called him up, found out that there was the Samsung Galaxy Note, there was the Samsung Galaxy, but all police officers and anybody under the age of 25 want what kind of phone? iPhone. They all want an Apple, right? So again, I've been a cop forever. Cops, there's two things cops don't like: change and things that stay the same, right? So I figured if they would pick, then it's their call, right? So we piloted all 3 phones, and the cops felt that the Samsung Galaxy Note, the one I thought was perfect, was too big. The iPhone was too small. They chose the Samsung Galaxy, and as of about 2012, every police officer in San Francisco was to get the Samsung Galaxy. But as we talked about earlier, the pace of technology, government and the rules are just way too far behind and in no hurry to catch up any faster in the United States than they are here in Great Britain. The problem was that there was no allowance to have our California information, including CalPhoto, which has the mugshots of the whole state, on a phone that was portable, because it could be stolen, it could be hacked, it could be all kinds of things. But the real answer was nobody had it, so nobody thought about doing anything. So it just so happens that the Attorney General from California used to be the district attorney from San Francisco, so a lot of this stuff gets done by who you know and how well you know them. And we met over the course of 6 months, because it was time after time of why you couldn't have it, and every excuse was lame. None of them were good reasons why you couldn't do it, until finally it got to the point of, okay, what do we need to do it? And they asked for dual authentication, same as was explained earlier by the Barclays security person, which is basically your ATM card and your PIN. We needed a password and a hard token. Presto changeo. Our smartphones now had California criminal data on them, and we were making cases like crazy in the field. Somebody'd give you a bad name. You'd be able to look them right up on the smartphone, get their picture, versus when I was a cop, and if you brought somebody in and they were lying, we loaded the copy machine with a lot of paper that said lie. We put their hand on the copier. We ran it once. Comes back lie. You lied. You gotta be undone. Then if they were really stupid, they would tell you who they were. So you laugh, but it happened. You had to make do. We had some ingenuity back in the day. I'm sure they do now, and as chief, I don't want to know what it is. So then in 2009, we had tried to embark on CompStat, but we didn't really have the computers. We had statistics, but they weren't computer generated. So we sort of cobbled it together with our lesser crimes in the aggregate, fortunately, like robbery, rape, arson, ones that you could literally count by hand and keep in a log. They were then added in, along with the crimes that we had more of, auto burglaries, auto theft, simple assaults, things like that. And we came up with a system, but they were bad numbers because they weren't computer generated, but they were the numbers that we were trying to hold every district and every captain to a standard of patrol, to do hotspot mapping and the like. And it worked to some degree because we've been counting them poorly for so long that as long as I figured you were counting them the same way, the trends were going to at least be accurate, if not the numbers. But then the press starts roasting you on your numbers because they say, hey, you said you have CompStat, but you have 6 different sets of numbers, which was actually probably low. We probably had 15 sets of numbers. So we're almost to the point now where we have one single set of statistics that are in real time. And so we can really start to do things. And actually fascinating thing that I know they do here in the Met, and that's that they reverse hot map the presence of where the officers are to see if they match up with the hot spots where you'd like to have them be. And that's definitely a lesson learned for me coming here. Anyway, so as we got better at our record management system and everything started to come together and we got the iPhones, we were now about to hit the ground running when it became to solving crimes and using the technology. And now these young cops, they do so much with the technology to solve crimes. On the one hand, I'm not going to be like Matthew. I was tired watching him. But the way they solve crimes, and we've made some great solves. But the other is now electronics are our number one things that are stolen. So our auto burglaries in San Francisco are up 30%. The number one thing stolen are electronics. The thieves have figured out ways. Some of the thieves break into cars just using a spark plug chip on the window, which instantly spider webs it, all the way to having different fobs that they can use to get garage doors open and or to pop trunks of tourists. And they can readily tell which is a rent-a-car because there's barcodes, again, technology. All the rent-a-car companies now, they're in such a hurry to get the cars in and out that they barcode everything. Well, all the thieves can tell which are the rent-a-cars. And a lot of people, when they drive to the city, they'll make a deliberate act of taking their suitcases or their purses and putting them in their trunk at any one of our Golden Gate Bridge, Lombard Street, you name it, and the thieves just watch them do it, hit the window, pop the trunk, and make off with everything that anybody's had. So we're trying to work with the rent-a-cars, again, more rudimentary, but to try and make the rent-a-cars less descript so that they're not such as an easy target, and at the same time do this education where we try to put, literally signage everywhere we go that auto burglars are up, guard your stuff. In the meantime, the officers themselves are making use of the cases we make now pretty much from phones, computers, cameras, you name it. It's for an old cop that used to do it the old-fashioned way. The ingenuity of these young officers is unbelievable. We had a great, I hate to give him credit because he's British, but we had a great homicide detective who literally was born here in the United Kingdom, Gary Watts. And he made a great homicide case. We had a young lady whose boyfriend was killed. Her family didn't like the guy because they thought he was trying to get her into a world even perhaps of human trafficking. Little did he know that her uncle was one of the biggest organized crime gangsters, murderers that we had in San Francisco that we hadn't been able to hang a case on for some time. Word gets out that she's in town from Los Angeles with the boyfriend. Next thing you know, he's murdered in front of her parents' house. They talk to her. She has a cell phone. She comes across that her father and her uncle, our major gangster, who was actually on the top 10 most wanted list by the FBI, were present at the homicide. So Gary Watts has the thought, hey, I'm going to backtrack all these phones. So he backtracks everybody's phone and gets the backwards digital footprint of where they all were. Then they all go to the uncle's house. So these three murderers were in three separate places. Pinging of the phones takes them all to the uncle's house in one part of San Francisco, where the three phones travel together to the scene of the homicide at the exact same time. Homicides committed, the three phones go back to the uncle's house and then go back to their three places. Gary has the presence of mind to then contact the FBI, most wanted list. Interviews are done, old-fashioned police work, locks everybody into their story that we know is complete rubbish. And I've learned that over the last 2 days, rubbish. And so that, just seeing if you're paying attention. So the case made, and he's done. We've made tremendous strides in human trafficking cases. Some of these are just unbelievably ugly. We had one in particular where our special victims unit, there were 3 young girls who were being trafficked by this guy who eventually got 150 years for his crimes. He would give the young girls cell phones and tell them to call him after what he knew to be 4 sex acts to be completed. The Special Victims Unit extracted information off of these cell phones to ID the suspect, other victims, and then how to locate the main suspect. The case was made. They did a forensic examination, again, of these phones. And these were phones where, as you know, some of the information is kept on the phones and some of that information goes to a server. So you can never assume that everything goes to a server. Sometimes the phone itself has to be gotten, as we're seeing right now with this Apple thing, which is another thing I forget who I was talking to yesterday, but we were having a big cell phone theft problem in San Francisco, and because here in the United Kingdom and in Australia, you've been bricking the phones for years, and all your street robberies regarding phones went down like 70%. So myself, the district attorney, and some of our legislators in California have been advocating that there be a locking device on phones, and we were able to be successful, and Apple did it and Samsung's doing it. So again, no good deed goes unpunished, and the United Kingdom has to bear some responsibility for this. Is now there's an Apple phone that the FBI particularly wants to get into, but the same locking device we were asking for it can't be defeated. And now that the question is, via court order, there's no technology that gets into that phone according to Apple. Apple's contemplating whether they're going to comply with the FBI's request to create the software on a one-time basis to get into the terrorist's phone that did the killings at San Bernardino. New wrinkle just happened on the way over here was the engineers that would now develop that software, if Apple decides to comply, say that they will quit versus creating that software that they know that they can create. So with every gain we make, it seems like we have another problem to navigate. And one of the biggest ones, again, is that pace with which we have to get everybody in the government to understand that we need to morph into the digital world with regard to our permissions and safety with regard to all of these things. Another case, we have an internet unit, crimes against children in San Francisco, and very sadly, we could make as many cases as we could put investigators on cases every day. There are so many child predators on the internet right now. It's just staggering. Anyway, this particular person was downloading and sharing child porn using peer-to-peer. The ICAC unit obtained special software and ID'd the IP address for these suspects, wrote the appropriate search warrants, which we didn't have to write in the beginning. When we first started doing all this, you could just call the subscriber or call whoever you needed at whatever company had the control of the IP address, and they would just give it to you. Similar as to back in the olden days, you could call the pager company, they would give you the subscriber information. You could call the phone company, you could call the utility company, and then a few of those companies got sued by criminals and defense attorneys who gave up the information, and they asked for search warrants, which again, I don't think we should ever see any of that stuff as anything but a mere delay. And if the officers are good at it, it's pretty short. Whereas if sometimes in law enforcement we try to argue whether or not we need it or not, whereas judicial review is always nice to have, because you don't want to lose that big case of that really, really bad person on a technicality and create the case law that you're going to end up having to get a search warrant later anyway. So some of the things we use, video, cell phones, computers, social media. Social media has been the gift that keeps on giving when it comes to criminals, at least in San Francisco and the United States. Some of our savviest criminals that we have a hard time catching doing whatever their crime is, we just arrest them for what they pose in online and post themselves. So we have many, many gang members that are prohibited from having guns, who can't resist the gangster pose on the internet, which gives us probable cause for a search warrant. We get the search warrant, we'll hit the house. We may not find the guns, but we'll find the exact clothes in that person's sizes that he was wearing in the video. We'll get a violation, and then usually that person will end up giving the guns up after the fact. And as long as we're on guns, just to put it in perspective, there are more guns in the United States than there are people, in the hands of people that aren't police. So we have a lot of guns in the United States, and a lot of them are in the hands of folks we just as soon not have them in the hands of. I already brought up the pinging, and again, using things like PenLink and things like that, we are really able to make use of this stuff. And I would suggest that you just got to let the young officers, you got to let them kind of do their thing. So as Daniel was suggesting, just a little bit of education to younger officers, they'll think of things that we would never think of because we just weren't raised on it. Whereas just like when we were younger and we came in, and the older, some older boss would take you under his or her wing and have the confidence in you to do something. If you let the officers do that, they'll amaze you at the things that they can find out. This old street commander, I was mystified when we had a couple of protests, and the protesters kept disappearing and then reappearing somewhere else, and I was confounded. You know, how do they keep doing that? And some just line officer with sleeve tattoos said, well, they're probably just hyperblogging and then going to the next place. And I was like, they're what? And he goes, yeah, they're just all, they have a prearranged website or blog or something that they've already pre-agreed to before they left, of where they'll go indoors and then where they'll pop out next, and if this happens, then that'll happen. And so that now has everybody in law enforcement in the United States on public domains, looking for blogging text, and now a lot of the activists and anarchists and stuff have now gone to darker sites and darker ways, or you'll even see one, stay off the web, don't text, don't say anything, police are watching, because we are. And anyway, so trying to find, so with all these gains, we now have the problems, right, that come with it. With it seems like every time we try to do something, we get more. Like it was brought up earlier, Matthew was asking about body-worn cameras, and we've talked a lot about it yesterday with the different agencies. We will have body-worn cameras for the San Francisco Police Department by the end of the year. It's expensive. It's about $1,000 for the camera, and it's about $1,000 a year in storage for the camera. The big argument with civil libertarians and other people, San Francisco is a very progressive, inclusive, transparent place. How long do you keep the video? We say a year for a lawsuit or a complaint, 2 years max, unless it's tagged to an incident. Everybody else says you got to keep all of it forever. If you keep all of it forever, it'll bankrupt San Francisco. It's just too expensive. I mean, the budget is already millions of dollars. Once the Freedom of Information requests come in to go over that data, and we have to redact it for things like sex cases or juvenile pictures or whatever, it could take forever to get to do. That's a problem. That's something we have to think. When do officers get to view the video, especially in situations like in custody deaths, officer-involved shootings, or serious misconduct? That's all over the place. There's no one answer, and we go on and on and on. Same thing goes with the various cameras. Like we don't have public cameras in San Francisco because the public, when they voted that we could have cameras, they just said you can have them, you can't look at them. San Francisco. So we have them, but we can look at them retrospectively with a search warrant if we want to solve a crime, but they're not very good cameras. So we're encouraging the public to hang as many private cameras as they have. We also have something that we're just about to put out that's called Fight Crime SF, where we're going to try and co-op every smartphone in San Francisco to be of evidentiary value, so that if you see a crime going on, you could actually take, as long as it's safe to do so, you could take a picture and or video the person in the act, and then you can actually send us that video, and we'll be able to, and actually say whether you want it to be anonymous or the other, and we'll either follow it up or not. But can you imagine, we have a daytime population of just a residential population of just over 800,000, but a daytime population of about 1.5 million, and everybody has a camera. So only 2,000 police officers, but if we could co-op all those phones, and all the crooks knew that everybody could potentially be videoing them, and I don't know about in the United Kingdom, but I know in the United States, especially in San Francisco, our district attorney expects a movie of every crime, which, you know, of course, as police officers say, well, if we had that, we wouldn't need lawyers or a district attorney. You could just show the jury the video, be that as it may. They want any cell phone stuff we have, any video we have, any DNA we have, fingerprints, and on and on and on. So again, the expectations of law enforcement are going to continue to go up, and I think we can meet those expectations here and abroad, which is just going to make us be that much smarter and build that legitimacy that people think that, you know, police officers, we're everything, right? We're the first contact for homeless. We're the first contact for people in crisis. We're the first contact for a critical incident. You're supposed to be able to make the distinction in an instant, whether you go towards it, whether you back off of it. If it's seen that you created the situation, even though in the United States you're expected to move to threat. Right now we're trying to take a page from Scotland and England and actually recognize in an edge weapon situation, we go the other way and create distance, and it goes on and on and on. So I'm just about done. In closing, I'd like to say, I'd like to quote a favorite band of mine that maybe you've heard. So the Grateful Dead are from, who's heard of the Grateful Dead? So people in law enforcement here have smoked weed before. That's good. So It's okay if you didn't inhale. It's no problem. So the Grateful Dead said, what a wild, crazy trip it's been, right? So when you think about how far it's come in 35 years of law enforcement, the new problem that's created is we have this new generation that's so smart and so good with computers that they'd rather text than talk, right? So then you have those of us that are my generation where information's the life's blood of policing. So if you can't talk to people and you can't build trust, they won't tell you anything. And if they don't tell you anything, you can't figure it out. Even if you do have that digital lead or whatever, you can't make the connection. So somehow those of us that are older before we leave, and those of us, those that are younger that get the digital and the DNA and the computers and the cyber and how you get in and how you get out, we somehow have to come together if we're really going to be as good as we're going to be, because the communication, the verbal communication, the ability to connect with people is becoming a bit of a lost art with this new generation. You know, Jerry Seinfeld does a great routine at the table when he's sitting across from a new date, and they're both on their phones, and he's trying to have a conversation, and he says, "Wouldn't you rather go across the street and then we could just text each other?" Well, that's what this generation would do. Everybody meets online, goes places. If tonight when you're at dinner at a restaurant, there's all kinds of people just on their phone without doing this. So it's so important, I think, that in law enforcement we never lose track of the personal connection and the old way that cops used to do stuff of talking and making connections with people and being, you know, those gregarious ladies and gentlemen that we were when we were or that we are going along. But you gotta bring the new kid, the new police officer along to be just as engaging. They're great if you can get them going. It's just hard to get them to put their cell phone down. So I don't know if you have a meeting. I know when we go to the federal building, you can't even bring your cell phone into a meeting because our FBI is convinced that everybody's spying for somebody. So even police, we have to, but those are the best meetings because nobody has a phone and you actually have to talk. So if I had one lesson at the end of an entire day of technology and cyber, is don't lose track of the way we used to do it.